381 Listen to you. This matter was very important. If the workers found out, they would be panicking, so they definitely couldn't make it public. Moreover, the method of purchasing raw materials wasn't legitimate, so it wasn't appropriate for too many people to know about it. After thinking about it, Yu Bing explained the current predicament and solution to Wu Jin, Wen Qin, and Jiang Chun in detail. Although they knew that they would be dead meat if they were caught, they had no other choice. If they really had to pay the compensation, the food factory would definitely have to close down. Risky maneuvers might pay off lucratively. After Yu Bing and Xiaoxing brought 1,500 yuan to the county city of Pingjiang County, Xiaoxing gave Zhang Chao the task of purchasing flour from the county city's black market. Then, the two of them set off for a county city 200 kilometers away. The two of them didn't dare to go to other communes in Pingjiang County. They were afraid that in the future, if they were bumped into and their true identities discovered, they would be backstabbed. Shanyang County. Yu Bing and Xiaoxing finally arrived at the station after about 4 hours of driving. As soon as they left the bus station, they realized that the city construction and road plan here were clearly much better than in Pingjiang County. Shanyang County was the richest county city under City H's jurisdiction. Shanyang County was located between 5 counties and cities. It was an important transportation route. There was a saying that if one wanted to be rich, one had to build roads first. This saying fit Shanyang County perfectly. Shanyang County relied on the convenience of its transportation road and prime location as the main road to develop the county. The government would set up toll stations at the entrances and exits of every town. These days, unlike in the future, when only highways collected tolls, the local people collected road usage fees for the roads under their jurisdiction whenever they entered or left every place. The dense traffic in Shanyang County also brought a lot of income to the local government. Moreover, the number of passengers and freight drivers had also led to the economic development of the places along the way. After the related service industry developed, the local government immediately encouraged the relevant towns to open industrial factories to take advantage of the roads. Coupled with the fertility of the land here, the wheat production was higher than that of the other areas of City H. This also meant that it was easier to buy flour in Shanyang County's countryside. Xiaoxing had only passed by Shanyang County a few times with the convoy, so he wasn't very familiar with it. Although they were going to collect it directly, they definitely couldn't ask a random family if they didn't know anyone. Otherwise, if they met the wrong person, the two of them would immediately be sent to the police station. Xiaoxing didn't know where the black market was, so he brought Yu Bing around the county city first. His plan was to go to the black market to find someone to help him collect a large amount of wheat. Soon, Xiaoxing discovered a suspicious person. The other party was an old man in his 50s or 60s. He had many patches on his clothes, and the soles of his worn-out shoes were almost flat. There were even holes in the soles of his shoes, and his skin looked rugged. He looked a little nervous and kept looking around. Xiaoxing quickly determined that this was the first time the other party had entered the county city to sell his family's things, and he probably didn't even know where the black market was, so he could only find an opportunity to sell them by the roadside alone. Hence, Xiaoxing immediately changed his original plan. Xiaoxing turned around and said to Yu Bing in a low voice, "There's a loaner there. We'll pretend that we need to build a new house. We'll say that the workers have a high demand for steamed buns and we don't have that many flour stamps, so we can only buy more from an individual." Yu Bing was better at doing business than Xiaoxing, but Xiaoxing was more proficient in underground trading. As the saying went, there were specialties in every industry. Yu Bing nodded without hesitation and said, "I'll listen to you." When Xiaoxing saw Yu Bing looking at him obediently with her round black eyes, his heart softened, but he suppressed the urge to pat her head again and turned around to bring Yu Bing towards the old man. This time, Xiaoxing and Yu Bing's goal was to go to the countryside, so they specifically wore clean clothes. However, there were 2 to 3 patches on their clothes, pants, and semi-new shoes. The first impression they gave off was that they weren't impoverished, but they weren't from the city either. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 382 Entrapment. Xiaoxing pretended to be confused as he looked around, as if he was looking for someone. When he saw the old man, he deliberately paused and took a few more glances. At this moment, the old man also saw 2 people. It was mainly because of Yu Bing and Xiaoxing's good looks that the old man noticed them. When he saw the 2 young people whispering to each other in hesitation when they saw him and seemed to want to walk towards him, he had a bold guess. He thought about how he had been here for half a day today but had yet to sell a pound of food, so he felt a little anxious. The old man thought of his grandson, who was still lying in the hospital, and gritted his teeth as he walked towards the 2 of them. "Are you guys going to buy food?" Yu Bing was stunned when she heard this direct question. If they were being used by the police as bait, this old man would be handcuffed. Xiaoxing wasn't surprised. This was the first time this old man had come out to sell food despite his old age, so it was normal for him to be inexperienced. Xiaoxing acted surprised and he said excitedly, yes, yes, yes. Our family had a few more children, so there's not enough space to live in. Now, we want to start construction on another piece of land, but the workers' food hasn't been settled yet. Do you have any excess flour? The old man also said excitedly, yes. How much do you want? Xiaoxing said, we want a lot. We want as much as you have. I just got married and my 2 sisters-in-law are pregnant. There's not enough food at home at all, so I want to buy more. The old man glanced at Yubing, who seemed different from the girls in the village. He could tell at a glance that she was an intellectual. There were not many city dwellers who could earn full work points. Such a delicate young lady probably only earned 5 to 6 work points, so she might not even be able to support herself. There were pregnant women at home who needed to be nourished, so it was normal that there was a high demand. After a simple guess, the old man didn't suspect anything anymore. His youngest son had died of tuberculosis at the beginning of the year, leaving his youngest grandson behind. His daughter-in-law had married elsewhere. Now, he had to help his youngest son leave behind descendants no matter what. After thinking about the remaining 500 caddies of food at home, the old man decided to leave only a small portion for his grandson to nourish his body after he was discharged from the hospital. My family has 500 caddies. I'll sell them all. Yubing and Xiaoxing didn't show it on their faces, but they were overjoyed. Xiaoxing calmly asked, despite knowing the answer, are they all in the county city? The 500 pounds of flour had to be filled with 2 to 3 bags of plastic fertilizer bags. Moreover, the old man didn't expect to meet a big customer today. Since it was also his first day selling, he was afraid of being arrested and confiscated, so he didn't take much. I only took 50 pounds of flour, so you guys might have to accompany me home. These words were precisely what Yubing and Xiaoxing wanted to hear. They also wanted to take the opportunity to see if they could get the old man to set them up and collect more flour from the local village. Hence, the 3 of them went straight to their destination. The old man's house was 2 to 3 hours away from the county city by foot. Because they were in a hurry, Yubing and Xiaoxing suggested taking the bus to the commune before walking to the village. The bus fare cost 0.05 yuan, so the old man was a little hesitant. Now, he wanted to save every cent he had. Seeing this, Yubing mentioned, Sir, we want to take the bus to go home early. We'll help you pay for your fare. The old man wasn't the kind of person who would take advantage of others, but it was already noon. If they delayed any longer, the 2 young people would have to walk at night, so he didn't refuse. The old man turned around and took out a bag from a corner more than 10 meters away. After opening it, he took out a large handful of chestnuts from the smaller gray bag as he said to Yubing with a smile, Can I exchange the 0.05 yuan fare with chestnuts? My family planted them themselves. They're sweet and delicious. The old man's hands that were holding the chestnuts were covered in calloused skin and were covered in black cracks. His nails were yellow and black, as if even if he soaked them in water for day and night, they wouldn't turn white. At this moment, there was a hint of anticipation on his face. He hoped that he could use his worthless food to exchange for a bus ticket and complete this deal that could let his grandson stay in the hospital with peace of mind. As Yubing and Xiaoxing exchanged looks, they felt a lump in their throats. Then, they quickly smiled and said in surprise, We happen to want to eat chestnuts recently. Unfortunately, our family doesn't have any. We even said that I would buy some on another day. What a coincidence. The old man smiled even more happily. My family's chestnuts matured early, so I brought some along this time. I wanted to sell them, but unfortunately, I didn't dare to ask anyone to buy them this morning for fear of being reported. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 383 settling the score. After Yubing opened the backpack on her back, the old man stuffed it all in and planned to give her another handful. If you like it, bring more back. This is a gift from me. Yubing hurriedly stopped the old man. The old man had to sell this in exchange for money, so how could she take it for free? Hence, she smiled and said, There's no hurry. We still have to go to your house. The old man nodded repeatedly and said happily, Then I'll carry it first. I'll give it to you when you come back. Xiaoxing wanted to help, but he was also worried that the old man wouldn't agree. After all, food was money. Hence, he could only support the old man as he carried the food on his back so that the old man wouldn't be so tired. It was work time today, so there were not many people on the bus in the urban and rural areas. There were still empty seats, so the 3 of them walked towards the back. After the few of them got on the bus, they began to chat with each other. In less than half an hour, they found out everything about the old man's family. The old man's surname was Wang. He and his wife had 3 sons and 3 daughters, who were already married. After his sons got married, they all lived in separate homes. He and his wife originally lived with his eldest son's family. After his youngest son passed away at the beginning of the year, he wanted to bring his youngest son's only child to his eldest son's house to take care of him. However, his eldest daughter-in-law didn't agree. Even if the old man and the others exchanged work points for food, she refused. She even threatened that if the two elders wanted to take care of the third son's child, they had to move out of their house. Their second son's family said that if they wanted to support them, they had to give their youngest son's house to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't agree to this matter. However, his youngest grandson had lost his father and his mother had remarried. That house was where his youngest grandson would settle down in the future. The two elders were naturally unwilling to give their youngest son's house away, so they could only bring their youngest grandson back to their third son's house to stay. Unexpectedly, bad things come in succession. Starting from last month, his 5-year-old grandson had caught a cold and coughed nonstop. He also had a recurring fever for more than half a month, and even taking medicine was useless. The old man brought his grandson to the hospital in town to take a look, but the result was that the cold had already become pneumonia. Only then did they hurriedly apply for hospitalization. However, 50 yuan was only enough for 3 to 4 days of treatment. The doctor said that they had to prepare 10 days and half a month's worth of money, so he came out to sell things today. We've arrived at the Yanqiao commune. Hurry up and get off, the ticket seller announced loudly at the front of the car. Mr. Wang hurriedly stood up and carried the bag on his back. Little Xiao, little Yu, we reached the station. The three of them got out of the car and walked towards the village together. Xiaosheng and Yu Bing deliberately lagged behind and mouthed a few words behind Mr. Wang. Then, Xiaosheng took a few steps forward and helped Mr. Wang hold the food on his back as he asked gently, Mr. Wang, can you help us go to your village to collect a few more bags of flour? I'll give you 0.1 yuan for every 10 pounds. Mr. Wang was a little surprised. Were 500 pounds of flour not enough? Little Xiao, why do you want so much? Xiaosheng said to Mr. Wang calmly, Mr. Wang, this isn't much. My family has to hire 10 people to build a house. They're villagers from the same village as us, so they didn't ask for that much money from us. The fertility of the land over there isn't very good, so everyone wants more flour. My father asked me to exchange for 20 pounds per person this time, which would be 200 pounds. Xiaosheng raised 2 fingers and continued to calculate. We have to live in this house for the rest of our lives after it's built, so we can't be careless. We have to ensure the quality of their food. Otherwise, how can they do their best for us? From morning to night, they'll be given 3 meals a day. It's not too much for a man to eat 10 steamed buns a day, right? Mr. Wang nodded. Seeing this, Xiaosheng continued, that's 1 caddy of flour. 10 people need 10 caddies of flour a day. They'll need at least 10 days to half a month to build a house, right? I estimate that 20 days means another 200 caddies. Xiaosheng raised 4 fingers and waved them in front of Mr. Wang. My wife happens to be pregnant. You can tell that she's an intellectual, right? Look at how thin she is. I don't dare to let her work while she's pregnant, so I have to prepare enough food for the next year. She needs to eat for 2 people. Even if she usually eats rice and sweet potatoes, I still have to prepare at least 200 pounds of flour. That's not too much to ask for, right? Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 384 Making up a story. As Xiaosheng babbled on, Mr. Wang, who was following Xiaosheng's train of thought, was stunned and didn't even think of the loophole in Xiaosheng's words. He felt that Xiaosheng's words sounded reasonable, so he nodded again. Xiaosheng immediately said, this doesn't even include my 2 sisters-in-law. They're not as weak as my wife, but when they're 5 to 6 months pregnant, my brother and the others won't bear to let my sisters-in-law work anymore. The 2 of them need at least 200 pounds of flour together. That's a total of 600 pounds. Xiaosheng raised another finger. After the house is built, won't we have to treat the entire village to a meal? Everyone will get a steamed bun. This is the basic standard. There are more than 600 people in our village, so that'll use up another 100 pounds of flour. Xiaosheng deliberately discussed the topic of building a house along with the matter of his pregnant relative's food. He was afraid that Mr. Wang would be too clear-headed, so he continued to go off tangent. By the way, my mother-in-law sent a letter a few days ago saying that there's a shortage of food in the city. My wife has 2 younger brothers and a sister in addition to my wife's grandparents, so the salary of only 2 people supports 7 people. They're so poor that they barely have enough to eat. As her son-in-law, shouldn't I express my gratitude? Although my wife is petite, she's not easy to appease when her temper flares up. I'm thinking of exchanging for 300 pounds. Xiaosheng looked at his fingers and saw that he had only managed to make excuses for up to 900 pounds. He didn't know how many pounds of flour Zhang Chao could collect, so he still had to continue making up stories. Yu Bing was amused when she heard this. This was the first time she realized that Xiaoxing was so good at making up stories. She covered her mouth as she snickered all the way. Now that she saw him stop talking, she knew he couldn't think of any more excuses, so she immediately went forward to salvage the situation. Yu Bing strode forward and said to Xiaoxing angrily, "You want to reduce the quantity by 200 pounds again? My mother said that she needs 500 pounds. Now, there was an excuse for an additional 200 pounds. In front of Mr. Wang, Xiaoxing smiled apologetically at Yu Bing and said, "Yes, 500 pounds. I was mistaken just now." Xiaoxing smiled at Mr. Wang helplessly and said, "Mr. Wang, we have to add 200 pounds. Mr. Wang looked at Xiaoxing sympathetically. He understood the difficulty of serving his wife's family. Seeing this, Yu Bing said, "Also, my brother-in-law is preparing to get married after the new house is built, so we have to prepare 100 pounds of flour for the banquet. People have children after they get married, right, Mr. Wang?" Mr. Wang nodded in agreement. "Of course." Yu Bing nodded seriously. "My sister-in-law has to be well-nourished when she's pregnant and can't keep eating grains. If we eat noodles but she doesn't get any, won't that be differential treatment? Won't her brothers from her maiden family ask for an explanation? Therefore, we need at least 1,500 pounds. When Xiaoxing heard how Yu Bing increased the quantity from 900 pounds to 1,500 pounds with such a vague excuse, he suddenly felt that he was too honest in comparison. He was worried that Mr. Wang would realize that the numbers didn't add up, so he immediately summarized the matter. "Mr. Wang, my family needs it very urgently. Otherwise, we wouldn't have specifically come out to buy it. Can you help us?" Mr. Wang was already confused by these numbers and was being led by the nose. Moreover, there were labor fees as well. Mr. Wang recalled that the nurse had come to urge him to pay the fees yesterday, so he made up his mind and decided to take on this job. This way, the doctor said that he would have enough money to buy nutritious food for his grandson in the later stages. Selling 500 pounds was risky, and selling 1,500 wouldn't make that big of a difference anyway. In any case, since they were taking the risk, so they might as well do something big. Mr. Wang replied to Xiaoxing firmly, "All right. I'll help you guys collect it." The corners of Xiaoxing and Yu Bing's mouths curled up into relaxed smiles. Because this was the first time Mr. Wang had done this, Xiaoxing secretly reminded him, "Mr. Wang, remember to look for those who are short of money and know how to keep secrets. Otherwise, we'll all be in trouble if word gets out." Mr. Wang said with a serious expression, "Don't worry about that. I was born and raised in the village, so I definitely won't look for someone I don't trust." Xiaoxing smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you." The few of them chatted amiably for half an hour before arriving at the village where Mr. Wang was. Because Yu Bing and Xiaoxing were unfamiliar faces and had done such shady things, Mr. Wang brought the two of them home on an uninhabited path. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 385 What's done is done. Mr. Wang lived in his youngest son's house, which was bought from someone else when they split up 2 years ago. There were 2 bedrooms and a living room. There was also a small room specifically used to store food. The kitchen and bathroom were all built with wooden boards and thatch. After they had moved in, they only repaired the living room and master bedroom. The rest of the place had not been renovated. The house occupied a large area, but it was relatively simple and crude. After the guests entered the house, Mr. Wang poured 2 bowls of hawthorn tea for the two of them to drink and said with a polite smile, "There's no good tea, but hawthorn tea can quench your thirst. Please don't mind." Yu Bing hurriedly replied, "I like drinking hawthorn tea." Mr. Wang then said to the two of them, "The amount you want is too big, so it won't be easy to gather it in a short period of time. You guys will probably have to stay at my house tonight." As long as they could get enough in quantity, they would agree to stay for 2 nights, let alone 1 night. There were bedrooms on both sides of the living room. The master bedroom was on the left, and the second bedroom was on the right. Mr. Wang turned to Yu Bing and Xiaoxing as he said, "The two of you will stay in the room on the right tonight, but no one has been living there, so it's a little damp. I'll clean it up for you guys now." Without waiting for their reaction, Mr. Wang went to clean up. Only then did Yu Bing and Xiaoxing realize the trouble caused by their fake identities. They exchanged looks in shock before looking away awkwardly. Xiaoxing was secretly happy, but he naturally didn't dare to show it on his face. When he saw Mr. Wang enter the room to clean, he hurriedly followed him in. "Mr. Wang, I'll do it. Don't worry about it." When Yu Bing heard this, she also followed him in. She was really embarrassed to trouble an old man to clean her room, so she said, "Mr. Wang, we'll do it ourselves." Xiaoxing snatched the rag from Mr. Wang's hand. When Mr. Wang saw that the two of them were in the room, he immediately felt that he was a third wheel, so he smiled and said, "Then I won't insist. You guys can clean up. I'll go look for my old friend to see if there's any flour he wants to sell." Yu Bing and Xiaoxing hurriedly agreed. Then, Mr. Wang left. What was done, so they definitely had to stay in the same room tonight. Yu Bing took the rag from Xiaoxing's hand without hesitation. Go sweep the spider webs in the corner. Some of them are too high for me to sweep. Xiaoxing's face was a little flushed. After agreeing, he went to the door to find a small broom and a long broom. One was used to sweep the spider webs, and the other was used to sweep the floor. Then, the two of them cleaned up in silence. Yu Bing turned around and stole a glance at Xiaoxing, who was looking up at the spider web in the corner of the roof with a focused expression. The light from the window shone on the side of his face. He had a high-nose bridge, thin lips, and a perfect jawline. Perhaps it was because the roof was a little dusty, but he frowned slightly. However, this expression didn't affect his handsome appearance. Yu Bing was mesmerized and stopped wiping the desk. When Xiaoxing felt a gaze on him, he turned his head and saw from the corner of his eye that Yu Bing was staring at him in a daze. He couldn't help but smile. This scene suddenly made Yu Bing realize what it meant to have beautiful scenery at her fingertips, but it also made her come back to her senses. She hurriedly lowered her head and continued to wipe the table. She was originally blushing after being caught, but on second thought, beautiful people and things were meant to be appreciated, so she grinned and let out a low laugh. The corners of Xiaoxing's mouth curled up, and in the end, he couldn't help but laugh as well. The two of them stopped acting bashful and laughed softly as they worked. Although she didn't know why, she felt that everything at this moment made her want to laugh to express the joy in her heart. There wasn't much furniture in the house. The bed was made of wooden boards and stools. There were two old-fashioned four-cornered long stools in the structure of a falcon. They were placed one in front of the other and supported by a wooden board that was 2 meters long and 1.3 meters wide. There was also a desk and a chair, as well as two large wooden boxes piled in the house. They were probably used to store miscellaneous items. Because no one had been living there, Xiaoxing moved the bed to the courtyard. Then, he cleaned it with clear water and placed it under the sun to dry. Yu Bing wiped the mat on it and placed it in the shade to dry. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 386 free love. An hour later, the room looked brand new. Because it was made of yellow mud and it had been a long time since someone lived there, there was a layer of dust on the ground. In order to avoid dust getting into the air, after a simple sweep, Yu Bing sprinkled a thin layer of water on the ground. Then, she opened the doors and windows so that the sun outside could shine into the room and dry the water. After Xiaoxing finished his work, he realized that there was an unfinished mat in the living room, so he started weaving. Yu Bing sat at the side in boredom as she watched Xiaoxing quietly. At 6 in the evening, Mr. Wang returned home with a handful of wormwood and some vegetables. When he saw the two of them sitting in the living room, he hurriedly stopped them and said, "You two are guests, so why are you helping me work? You can't do this. Stop." Xiaoxing stopped what he was doing and looked up with a smile. "I weave at home quite often. I have nothing to do now anyway." Yu Bing echoed, "Mr. Wang, just let us do some work. We're really bored." Mr. Wang could tell that the two of them were diligent people like him and couldn't stand being idle, so he smiled helplessly and said, "All right, I won't stand on ceremony with you guys. Just treat it as your own home. I'll go cook now." Yu Bing really wanted to cook, but she knew that Mr. Wang's family couldn't afford to waste ingredients, so she could only turn around and continue watching Xiaoxing. Seeing Yu Bing's bored expression, Xiaoxing suggested teaching her how to weave. Yu Bing nodded repeatedly. She had watched him so many times but had never done it before. After Mr. Wang finished cooking, he turned around. When he saw the intimate interaction between Xiaoxing and Yu Bing in the living room, he no longer doubted their relationship. When he carried the dishes into the living room, he teased, "It's popular for young people to marry who they like these days instead of having arranged marriages. You guys got married out of love, right?" When Xiaoxing and Yu Bing heard this, they blushed. The two of them were not even officially in a relationship yet. Seeing this, Mr. Wang thought that the two of them were just being shy, so he laughed out loud and said, "Although my wife and I had an arranged marriage, our loving relationship is not inferior to yours." The two of them hurriedly went to the kitchen to serve the dishes to avoid being teased again. Because there were guests, Mr. Wang even took out cured meat and cut a small piece of it. Mr. Wang made 3 dishes and a soup. There was cured meat stir-fried with dried bamboo shoots, stir-fried loofah, chives, scrambled eggs, and vegetable soup. Although the food didn't taste good, there was meat and vegetable, so it was a decent meal for treating guests with. After dinner, Mr. Wang told Yu Bing and Xiaoxing that his friend was interested in selling 200 pounds of flour. The supply company's price was 0.18 yuan a caddy of flour if one had stamps. Yu Bing and Xiaoxing didn't have stamps, so the purchase price of Mr. Wang's flour was set at 0.26 yuan, according to the black market price. Even if Mr. Wang could receive flour that was lower than this price, they didn't interfere. As long as the quality was fine, they were willing to pay an additional fee of 10 caddies of 0.1 yuan. However, Mr. Wang was an honest person, so he quoted the price Yu Bing and Xiaoxing offered. This price was neither high nor low, and he didn't have to take the risk to sell it on the black market. Therefore, when Mr. Wang mentioned it to his old friend, they quickly agreed after discussing it. Yu Bing took 260 yuan from the bag she carried on her back and handed it to Mr. Wang. Mr. Wang, please accept this payment for the 1,000 caddies of flour. If you agree, you can just bring the goods back. We'll pay for the 500 caddies and your hard work together when we leave. The payment can be adjusted after that. Mr. Wang smiled and said, it's fine. You guys are already here, so how could I be afraid that you guys will run away? On the other hand, aren't you afraid that I'll pocket so much money? Yu Bing smiled and said confidently, I believe in my own judgment. You're definitely not a greedy person. Anyone who didn't have ulterior motives would be touched by such unconditional trust. After Mr. Wang took the money, he said energetically, since you trust me so much, I can't let you down. Every family is idle after dinner, so I'll go out and find a few families to try my best to gather enough flour for you guys. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 387 Chai. After Mr. Wang left, Xiaoxing saw some unfinished firewood in the courtyard. Thinking about how Mr. Wang was the only man in his house and how Mr. Wang still had to chop firewood even though he was so old, Xiaoxing took an axe from the side and started chopping. Yu Bing boiled hot water in the kitchen to take a bath. The two of them planned to go back that day, so they didn't bring a change of clothes. Before Mr. Wang left, he found clothes that he and his wife had only worn a few times and lent them to Yu Bing and Xiaoxing so that the two of them could change into them after showering. Although Yu Bing was a little obsessed with cleanliness, she was still able to adapt to the environment. She sweated profusely during the hot day, so if she didn't change her clothes, it would be useless even if she took a shower. It was fine if she couldn't change her undergarments. Now that she had clothes she could change into, she wasn't that picky. After Yu Bing took a shower, she changed into a tank top and pants. After she washed the clothes she had changed out of, she hung them up in the courtyard. From the corner of his eye, Xiaoxing saw Yu Bing's two slender and fair arms and felt his mouth go dry. After he coughed lightly and moved his body, he continued to chop firewood with his back facing Yu Bing. In the future, it was normal for girls to wear tank tops in the summer, so Yu Bing didn't think there was anything wrong with her appearing in front of Xiaoxing in a tank top. After she was done, she even approached Xiaoxing and said gently, hurry up and take a shower. Otherwise, you might not be able to when Mr. Wang comes back. Xiaoxing replied without turning his head, got it. There's still some firewood, so I'll take a shower after chopping them. Rest first. I'll wait for Mr. Wang to come back and ask about the purchase. Hearing this, Yu Bing didn't say anything else. Because there was no toothbrush, Yu Bing mixed warm water with salt and started to rinse her mouth. Then, she went to the living room to get the mugwort leaf that Mr. Wang had specially picked and returned to her room to burn it. Mugwort leaf could ward off humidity and prevent mosquitoes. Xiaoxing heaved a sigh of relief when Yu Bing returned to her room. Looking at the closed door, Xiaoxing was a little nervous and expectant. After cutting the remaining firewood, he went to the living room to get a change of clothes and went to the kitchen to get hot water to shower. When the room was filled with smoke from the leaf, Yu Bing covered her nose and left the room. After estimating that the leaf was almost burnt, she opened the door to let the mosquitoes and smoke out. At this moment, Xiaoxing had also finished showering and came to the courtyard. Yu Bing saw that Xiaoxing was wearing a tank top and knee-length shorts. His firm muscles and perfect body contours were quite eye-catching. Such a masculine man was just her type. Seeing Xiaoxing dressed so casually, Yu Bing suddenly felt a sense of blissfulness. Xiaoxing, on the other hand, blushed awkwardly. When Yu Bing saw Xiaoxing's obedient look, she chuckled. Xiaoxing was a little embarrassed. How could a man like him be coyer than a girl like Yu Bing? Hence, he relaxed and ignored Yu Bing's gaze as he washed his clothes in the courtyard. When Yu Bing saw that the smoke in the room had almost dissipated, she stopped teasing Xiaoxing and turned around with a smile to return to her room. At the foot of a tree, a 40-year-old woman with short hair and wearing a gray shirt walked to the foot of the tree. After she sat down beside the woman who was holding the soles of her shoes, she asked curiously, Jiang Mo, do you have a rich relative who came to the village? The woman holding the soles of her shoes was wearing a fashionable plaid shirt and her withered hair was tied back in a bun. When she heard Chen Ni's question, she was confused. Why are you suddenly asking this? Chen and I replied, when I passed by, I saw smoke still rising from the kitchen of your third brother's house and heard sounds from inside. Jiang Mo frowned as she said in disdain, maybe my mother-in-law came back with that little burden. I already said that it's normal for children to catch a cold and have a fever, so why does he listen to those doctors and insist on hospitalization? Is hospitalization an option for poor people like us? He even came to ask my family for money. Does he think we have too much money or something? Chen and I wanted to retort when she heard this, but she thought about how it was inconvenient for a third person to know what she was about to say, so she looked around and whispered into Jiang Mo's ear, I suspect that your father-in-law might have found a way to make money. I eavesdropped on your father-in-law and my in-law saying that your father-in-law wanted flour for 0.26 yuan per caddy. He wanted as much as my in-laws had. Your family might really have a low-profile rich relative. If there's anything good in the future, don't forget me. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 388 Rich Relative. When Jiang Mo heard this price, her eyes lit up. When did the Wang family have such a rich relative? If someone wanted flour, her family was willing to sell them. Moreover, if they were relatives, they might be able to negotiate the price and ask the other party to give them more. How much did you want? How much did your family sell? Chen and I extended 2 fingers. I saw it clearly. At that time, your father-in-law was holding a thick stack of money. In this day and age, the maximum face value of bills was 10 yuan, so one could imagine how valuable 10 yuan was these days. To be able to take out dozens of bills so casually was quite shocking for ordinary families in the countryside. Moreover, it was an upright person like Mr. Wang. Jiang Mo's eyes widened. This time, she could no longer sit still. She stood up to leave, but then she sat back down and whispered into Chen Ni's ear, you can't spread word of this. Chen and I rolled her eyes. I'm not stupid. I'm telling you because you guys are relatives. This is a speculative matter. Although it's a relative who wants flour, once it concerns money, things are different. I don't want to get my in-laws arrested. Jiang Mo didn't care who was arrested as long as she was fine. After receiving Chen Ni's guarantee, she rushed home. The moment Jiang Mo entered the house, she saw the Wang family's second son sitting in the courtyard drinking mulberry wine with a very satisfied expression. Thinking of how her father-in-law had dragged others to get rich together with him, but how her husband didn't know anything, Jiang Mo was furious. You only know how to drink. You might as well just drink yourself to death. When the Wang family's second son saw his wife's angry expression, he was a little impatient. Why are you shouting? I only drink a small cup every day. Jiang Mo took a small stool from the side and sat beside her husband. Then, she suppressed her anger and asked patiently, think about it carefully. Does your family have any rich relatives you rarely interact with? After the Wang family's second son thought about it, he shook his head and replied firmly, no. Jiang Mo snorted and told him what she had heard from Chen and I. Your father hid it so well that he even hid it from his biological son. He didn't think of you when an opportunity to earn money came. Instead, he thought of those outsiders. I think he resents us for not lending money to third brother's son for treatment. Or he resents us for not adopting that little burden. His hand that was holding the wine glass froze. Then, he narrowed his eyes and thought about it. He felt that Jiang Mo's guess made sense. There's no point in my father doing this. That little burden still has to be raised for more than 10 years before he becomes an adult, but he wants me to raise him for free without even giving me a house. Dream on. He's not my son. I have to ask my father about this personally. Jiang Mo thought so too, so the husband and wife immediately reached an agreement. Before Jiang Mo left, she saw her youngest son playing with the water at the side. She frowned at her eldest daughter, who was washing clothes, and instructed, keep an eye on your brother. If he catches a cold, I'll teach you a lesson. With that, she pulled her husband out of the door. When the two of them arrived at Chen Ni's house, Mr. Wang had already left. The Wang family's second son looked around but didn't see his father, so he asked, Mr. Chen, where did my father go? After Mr. Wang glanced at the Wang family's second son, he slowly raised his pipe to smoke as he replied aloofly, I don't know. The Wang family's second son knew that Mr. Chen didn't like him, so he couldn't be bothered to stay any longer and left with Jiang Mo. Mr. Chen's expression darkened slightly as he shook his head in disdain. Although he didn't know why the two of them were looking for Mr. Wang, they were probably up to no good. He really looked down on people who were so cold to their relatives. After the Wang family's second son and his wife left, the two of them asked around the village again. Jiang Mo looked at her husband and suggested, why don't we go straight to third brother's house and wait? Your father will eventually come home. The Wang family's second son agreed. When the two of them arrived at their third brother's house, they saw that the door wasn't locked. After the couple exchanged looks, they pushed open the door. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 389 Raising the Price. Jiang Mo originally thought that her mother-in-law was at home, but she didn't expect to see a young man hanging clothes in the courtyard. Thinking of the rich relative Chen and I mentioned, she immediately smiled and walked forward. Young man, you're a relative who came to visit, right? After Xiaoxing glanced at the Wang family's second son and his wife, he had a bad feeling, but he changed the topic without batting an eyelid. You're Mr. Wang's son and daughter-in-law, right? Mr. Wang is out. I'll tell him that you guys were here when he comes back later. The Wang family's second son smiled and said, I'm not looking for my father. I'm looking for you. I heard that you guys want to collect the flour. My family has flour too. It's just that can you raise the price? We're relatives. Don't you think so? We don't have to mention too much. Just 0.3 yuan per caddy will do. Although the Wang family's second son and Jiang Mo didn't get the story straight beforehand, it didn't stop the two of them from thinking of the same thing. Xiaoxing's heart skipped a beat, but he said with a smile, I think you might have misunderstood something. I just happened to pass by the Yanqiao commune. Because it's a little late, I borrowed this place for the night. No matter what question it was, Xiaoxing didn't answer directly. He only used ambiguous words to mislead Wang Lao Air. No matter what, he couldn't admit to buying flour. Mr. Wang had once said that his two sons weren't good people and his second son was very greedy. Seeing the actions of the couple in front of him, Xiaoxing was more inclined to believe that they were the Wang family's second son and his wife. The Wang family's second son and his wife had already determined that Xiaoxing was their relative. At this moment, Yu Bing, who was about to sleep, heard voices in the courtyard, so she draped a thin blanket over herself and walked out. Hearing the creak of the door opening, the people in the courtyard turned to the door. As Jiang Mo glanced at Yu Bing and Xiaoxing, her mind raced. Seeing that the two of them were about the same age, she went forward and held Yu Bing's arm affectionately. Then, she smiled at Xiaoxing and said, This is your wife, right? She's really good looking. As Yu Bing looked at Jiang Mo in confusion, she looked docile and gullible. Jiang Mo came up with a plan to find a breakthrough from Yu Bing, so she said, We're the second branch of the Wang family. We know you want to buy some flour and we want to sell it too. Yu Bing wasn't that naive, so when she heard this, she said in confusion, We didn't buy flour. Your mistake. When the Wang family's second son and Jiang Mo heard that the two of them were still denying it, Jiang Mo continued to persuade them, We're all relatives, so we won't harm you guys. Don't be afraid that we'll report you. How could we do such a thing? The Wang family's second son simply used his father as an excuse. My father asked me to look for you guys directly, since we're family. He's busy collecting flour outside and doesn't have time to talk. Xiaoxing knew what kind of people they were, so he naturally didn't believe them. He said with a confused expression, I think you've really misunderstood. No matter what the Wang family's second son and his wife said, all they got was denial, so they lost their patience. After the two of them muttered softly at the side, they searched the courtyard and room. Yu Bing and Xiaoxing stood in the courtyard calmly. They searched everywhere, but only saw a few 100 pounds of flour, some mixed noodles, and rice in the small storeroom. From the amount, they were obviously rations that Mr. Wang had kept for himself. Just as the two of them were feeling dejected, Mr. Wang returned with his wheelbarrow. There was a plastic bag of fertilizer on the cart. The two of them immediately rushed up and untied the rope at the mouth of the bag. When they saw the white flour inside, they revealed smug smiles. Mr. Wang was startled by his second son and wife, so he said unhappily, What are you guys doing here? The couple had already forgotten how they had scolded their father a few days ago for coming to borrow money, so they smiled and said, Dad, why didn't you tell us that our relatives want to buy flour? We have flour too. When Mr. Wang heard this, he had a bad feeling and subconsciously looked at Xiaoxing and Yu Bing. He had already been very careful and discreet, but this unfilial son still found out. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 390 Unyielding. Mr. Wang denied with a dark expression, Stop spouting nonsense. Do you guys want me to be arrested? Hearing this, the Wang family's second son crossed his arms in front of his chest and restrained his smile as he said, Dad, the flour is here, so stop pretending. Mr. Wang wanted to retort, but he couldn't find an excuse at the moment. In order not to expose Yu Bing and Xiaoxing, he could only bite the bullet and say angrily, We didn't have enough to eat, so I had no choice but to buy it. Besides, if I had borrowed from you guys, would you guys have given it to me? If you guys think there's something wrong, report it. Jiang Mo hurriedly put in a good word for them. They used the good cop, bad cop method. However, Mr. Wang refused to be persuaded and chased them away. Seeing that their father refused to relent, the Wang family's second son and his wife had no other choice. The Wang family's second son wanted to say something, but Jiang Mo pulled his arm. When he turned around and saw the look his wife gave him, he shut his mouth. Jiang Mo said with a fake smile, since you don't like us, we won't insist. With that, she pulled the Wang family's second son out. The Wang family's second son didn't understand what his wife was up to, but he knew that she had more ideas than him, so he left without saying anything. Mr. Wang stood at the door. When he saw the two of them leave, he turned around to lock the door. Mr. Wang looked at Yu Bing and Xiaoxing with a guilty expression. I'm really sorry. When I went to collect the flour, I said that a relative had a wedding and needed to buy some flour. I don't know where they got the news. Yu Bing and Xiaoxing didn't panic. This matter was risky to begin with, but purchasing flour was urgent, so they had no other choice and could only deal with whatever came their way. Yu Bing comforted him. It's fine, Mr. Wang. Everything has risks, so you don't have to take it to heart. After Xiaoxing looked at the bag in the car, he asked, Mr. Wang, how many pounds are there here? Mr. Wang wiped the sweat off his forehead. 200 pounds. I didn't dare to pull the cart to the other families. Otherwise, it would be too conspicuous. I've arranged the time for them and they'll bring it over directly later. I'll pay after I've weighed the quantity. With that, she instructed, little Yu and shouldn't come out of the room. Lock the door. I'll deal with the rest. Xiaoxing nodded with a smile. It's been hard on you tonight. There's hot water in the kitchen, so take a shower later. Ever since his wife brought his grandson to the hospital, Mr. Wang had been living alone. Today, because of Yu Bing and Xiaoxing's arrival, this desolate house finally regained a trace of coziness. When Mr. Wang heard this, he said with a smile, it's fine. Rest early. I'll take leave tomorrow morning to send food to my wife and grandson. At that time, I'll push a wheelbarrow to send the flour into the city. You have to think about how to transport this flour back in advance. Xiaoxing had already arranged the transportation, so he wasn't worried. Don't worry, I've already arranged it. Let's rest first. After Xiaoxing and Yu Bing returned to their room, they didn't go to sleep immediately. As the two of them sat opposite each other on the bed, their relaxed expressions disappeared, and their faces were filled with worry. Yu Bing said firmly, the Wang family's second son and his wife definitely won't give up so easily. Xiaoxing nodded in agreement and replied with a frown, they definitely won't give up yet, so we have to think of a way, but they probably won't come again tonight. If something happens to us, they won't get anything either. As Yu Bing and Xiaoxing discussed softly in the room, the Wang family's second son and his wife were also secretly observing from a corner far outside the house. The two of them were very patient this time. They watched as 8 people entered Mr. Wang's house at different times with flour on their backs. They only stood up when the light in the small courtyard disappeared. The Wang family's second son said excitedly, honey, why don't we go home and carry the flour over directly? There's so much flour, so the old man can't use the excuse that it's all for himself, right? Jiang Mo looked at her husband in disdain and pursed her lips. If he insists that it's all for himself, can you show evidence that proves otherwise? Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much.